right.
Well, the audio, it always works right away, I think. So here we are once again at PaizoCon.
Well, actually, I took it out
Oh,
of the
you moved the
screen.
book. Up there, you put the book back. And it says we're live. Up, we're live.
We're live.
Hey. See, we should probably do what they said and do the pre-roll so that I don't have this like dead space. But
Yes, it's a tip you learned in the content creation panel.
I did. So this one we're going to be talking about creating a winning monster for RPG Superstar by
That's
Roll for
right.
Combat. And we have the Battles of Bestiary because I forgot I need to look at these monsters because it's a little bit easier to look at monsters while we're talking about them. So Mark,
Yes.
you've written a monster or two for Pathfinder.
Yeah, maybe at least one or two.
And maybe one or two. And I've written one or two. And what would you say if you were going to be writing a monster? What is the most important one thing about writing a monster?
You have to have a concept. If you don't start with a concept for your monster, you might wind up with a monster in the end anyway somehow, but you were not going to wind up with a winning monster.
Okay.
Even if you have the best math and the best details, if your concept wasn't a good concept, you could still be like, this monster works. You could run it in a game, it'll probably be fine, but it's not gonna win.
So we're talking about specifically RPG Superstar, which is the contest that we run where you enter a monster, and then if you win, you get in the book, and then we have both public voting and professional voting.
Mm-hmm.
And you went through yourself for the first time a ton of monsters pretty recently, and you saw were the professional and the public kind of in sync, or were they
I would
off?
say that for the most part, they were in sync. There were various technical reasons that the public voting was not ideal that I think I would like us to fix for next year, and I've already discussed some of them with you. But if you take those out, which you could by carefully looking at the public votes, they were pretty in sync. They were off by a lot in some cases because of the weirdnesses with the votes, but they were pretty in sync otherwise, and the judges, they were at least as in sync as like individual judges with each other, because like that we like every show has like the one judge or a few judges who are like harsher, and like the one who is like, what's the American Idol name for it, like the Paula, who is just like, oh well, this is another monster, almost everything gets 10 out of 10, it's so good.
But the thing with monsters is that they're really, really, really hard to do well. They're very easy to make. And one of the advantages of Pathfinder is that, oh yeah, we have a whole system for making monsters. There's a lot of online
Pathfinder
tools.
makes it easy to do a monster
Yes.
that's good enough for
Right.
your game.
Right.
And that's great. That's amazing. A lot of game systems, that's not the case. It's actually, in Pathfinder First Edition, pretty hard to make a monster that's good enough for your game that's going to work the way that you expect. But, Steven, you're right that going from good enough for your game to, like, you're going to blow away the judges and the other fans and they're going to vote you all the way up, that's a big gap. It's tougher. If you have the concept, though, the tools that Pathfinder provides makes it easier to go from that concept to your winner.
So why is it so hard to go from the copper, which copper monsters are all very good. Like there's no bad copper monsters in Battles of
I mean,
Bestiary.
Gamayun are copper,
know,
and
Gamayun.
they're like 70% of the population
I
of
know.
the city
Gamayun
that we're in.
they're 70% of Battle Zoo. They're just everywhere. But it's like what makes it the difference in your opinion, and I'll answer too, is that like when it's funny because like you and I went through the final judging. And it was very quick. Like we were able to figure out, like, yep, that's grand. Yep, these are platinum. These were gold. Like we were able to figure out what were the cream of the crop very easily. And I think
Well,
you and I
thanks to the judge
agreed
votes.
that too. But you know what I meant. But right between once it was all sifted, we were able to very quickly. And it was
Yeah.
like one or two. We
had borderline ones
there
where I
was
was
a
like,
couple
this is a
borderline.
judgment call, and then you made the call.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it was pretty closely agreed quickly. It took about like maybe an hour or two at most, and there were hundreds to go through because the judges helped. But to get to that point, like Steven said, the difference between a copper winner and a platinum winner is that they're both still winners, first of all. So that's why they all need the concept. But if you get your details right, if you understand rules language and how it's used in Pathfinder, that's how you're going to impress the judges and make it all the way up to the top. If you have a great concept but you can't execute as well, it still has to be at least not like completely a failure to execute, but then you're gonna probably win, but not by as much is what I've found. And there are small things, and sometimes judges won't even notice those small things, so it's hard. Like I would say, you impress me if you actually correctly use names of your strikes on your creature, because 90% of people will use bite, which is yes, jaws or fang. If you use bite, that is not an acceptable strike. And I won't really count that against you because 90% of people do. But if you actually use jaws, I'm like, oh, you actually use jaws. That's amazing. I'm very happy. But not even all of the judges will notice that. And not even I will notice it every time. I sometimes just, so many people have said bite. I have gone into hypnosis over it. I know I don't even notice it on one of the monsters. So sometimes the details that will really impress one judge, no other judge will see. And therefore, you really have to be perfect on all of them if you want to get like grand or platinum, because you need to impress all the little things that each judge notices as they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing with a gold or platinum, first of all, in my opinion, it's like it has to be a monster that can tell a story. Like it has
Mm-hmm.
to be a monster that you're like, wow, that is a really cool monster. What's their deal? Like if you think about like not Pathfinder, but like beholders and mind flayers, some of the and dragons. Dragons are interesting because they're like their own subcategory. But like you can build whole categories out of like drow. Like drow. Then they've built a lot of things out of just the drow concept. So it's like, wow, that's a really cool monster. And as opposed to say a one shot, and as opposed to a monster that you can't really use outside of like one specific area. um, Take a mimic. Actually, a mimic you can think of, is a mimic a one shot monster? Kind of, but they're so freaking cool. Like it's like a mimic is a good example of a platinum grand prize monster because it can be used in so many different ways in so many different environments, and it really gets the mind going, and it just is so fascinating in so many ways.
Yeah.
And
If we got a mimic that was like the first mimic ever made and there weren't any already in Pathfinder and that was submitted for the contest, like it, assuming the execution was there, it would get platinum or grand
yeah,
because of what Steven said.
yeah, I mean, that's what makes it, is that it has to be something that really gets the mind going. And then, so that's the main concept of the monster. Um, then you actually have the monster itself, which is with its abilities. And this is where it gets hard. You have to have abilities that tell a story. You have to have abilities that sort of explain through actions what this thing is all about. The best example is actually the winner of the Battles of Yesterday, the Shell Spitter, which was just a CR2. But it was so interesting. It was like, okay, this is monster made out of rock that could really be in any environment, that eats rock and also has a gem for its heart. So the monster is treasure. And that was like, okay, I'm like, okay, you got me. I'm like, now I'm interested, because you're like, ooh, so people can go around and hunt them. And then the bigger ones have bigger hearts and bigger treasure. So there's this whole story right there. Like you can build an entire adventure out of this, Mark. Like,
Oh, really?
oh yeah, I think you could. But anyhow, maybe Joel the Indigo Wow might have some shell splitters in there, maybe. But if you could build an entire adventure or adventure path out of a single monster, then you got a pretty good monster there, And I'm not saying like if you do like kind of a one-shot monster, like one of my favorite ones was the booth mimic. Or what was it? The booth. It's a building-sized mimic, and it will kill and eat people as it goes in. It's like a Roach Motel for adventurers, and it's a great concept, and it was a really good monster. I loved it. Can you like really build a whole adventure around it? Maybe. It's like, does it have a whole story? I mean, I think I forgot what it won, but it's an excellent concept for a monster, and you can build a lot around it. You could definitely build a story around it and build lore around it. and
Right.
have a lot of cool aspects for that. But the best monsters have a lot of background, a lot of richness, and then even the abilities of what they do are fascinating. So
Yeah, you need interesting abilities that are going to make the encounter interesting. That doesn't mean that a winner clutters up their monster with like 15 abilities. Oftentimes, you can see the case of a very enthusiastic designer has great ideas and is like, let me show how talented I am by putting in all of these abilities. And there's like actually 15 would not fit the word count, but there's like literally nine and they interact with each other in a cool way. And it's like, this does show off your skill at design, but it's not going to win as easily because it's too complicated. You've put in too much. The GM has trouble running that monster now,
mhm.
and some of those abilities will never be seen before the monster is killed. So you need to be careful. You need to put in a few very evocative abilities that really carry their weight.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then that's going to help you. Like Steven said, you want a monster that can be used in
Oh,
multiple
Butcher Booth
contests.
actually was
A
cool.
monster that can be used in multiple contexts. It doesn't mean it has to be an entire adventure's worth, but
Mhm.
if you have a monster that's a one-off and it's just like ha 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 ha, it's a funny joke, but now we'll never fight this again because we've played that joke out, then it's not going to be top winner because that's it,
Oh, yeah.
right?
By the way, Joke
You
Monster.
fought it once, nobody is going to be interested to fight it again. They know it's gimmick. That's it about it.
Yeah, Joke Monsters, by the way, will never win. They actually get pretty far in public voting, and then they get massacred in private voting. We just actually saw that. I saw some monsters that were getting like nines and tens in the public voting, and then the professional judges gave them like threes, and they
But
didn't even make it to copper.
a
So.
shtick monster that has some humor to it can still get a prize.
Hmm.
Like we definitely had like a silver
Oh
or
yeah,
something
they were fun. There's
that
some
was
fun ones.
like this is a golem that does random effects.
Oh, I
And
love
those
that one.
yeah that one was cool. I
That was
liked it.
very cool. That was very cool. But in terms of actual monsters, I'm just like flipping through the book. There's so many things to talk about. So I could talk about what not to do. How about that? That's an easier topic than what to do.
Right.
What not to do. Don't do a shtick monster. Don't do a monster that is one dimensional that can only attack like one way unless there's a very specific reason. You often want to have, I'd say, you do want to have ranged abilities as well as melee. If you don't have a ranged attack, better be a really, really good reason. I can't think of too many monsters that don't have melee. It's pretty rare. If they don't
I
have a
think they all
ranged,
have melee.
yeah, oh, that's right. They all have
I
melee.
mean, there may be one or two in Battle Zoo
Yeah,
Bestiary, but in Bestiaries 1 through 3 for Pathfinder, they all have melee.
right. So they all have melee. If they don't have range, then usually they have spells.
Or flying or
Right. Or
something.
some are very fast movement or
Or
ability.
they're very low level
Mm-hmm.
because once you get to a certain level, if you can at least do something at range, you're gonna get kited.
Yep. Yeah, you have to have the ability for the monster to defend itself in all ways. Um,
At the very bare minimum, it should have a way to retreat. Like if you're
mhm.
like, this is the Earth monster of Earthishness. It's level 15. It's completely earthy. It cannot shoot anything, even Earth, because I've decided it can't, and it can't fly because it has to stay on the Earth. At least give it burrows so it can be like, oh, you're going to kite me. That's fine. I'm just gonna burrow into the ground and then
Mhm.
destroy this city over there. Great job, heroes.
What else do we have? The other one I would say is don't go overboard with attacks of opportunity. I don't know why we get a lot. We get probably more. Like actually, people called this out on that. That say, oh, a lot of the monsters in Battle Zoo have attack of opportunity. We balanced it. I don't think we have too many.
I think
I just
you
think we
have
just
more
two.
than
Yeah,
Pathfinder has in general,
in
and
general.
like I'm gonna make sure that we don't have that many in the next one. But
Hmm.
I wasn't the director of game design at this time. So the thing is that people were used to attacks of opportunity. This contest came out when the game was new and
Hmm.
when attacks of opportunity used to be on everything in
Right.
Pathfinder first, so they were like, "Oh yeah,
Hmm.
well, it's normal to have attacks of opportunity." But later when people
Hmm.
played the game for enough time, we're like, "Oh, it's mostly on like soldiery monsters and a few other things."
And if you're going to put in abilities, actually, I'll give you an example of something cool. Like the scroll mold, if you're going to put in spells, make sure the spells all make sense. Now, this can be really tough, but like the scroll mold is a perfect example. Scroll mold, which I love, has a speed of 0 feet. I think it's the only monster that has a speed of 0 feet. But yet, it can cast Longstrider. So when it needs to, it can like get out of town.
Because it doesn't have a M dash for its speed. It has 0. That's a number, and it
Yeah.
can be improved.
Right. So something like that, when you see that, you're like, aha. And that immediately elevated it. I was like, this person was thinking this through. Like, because when I first read that, I'm like, what? You can't have a monster with like a 0 foot monster, really, unless they've teleported or something. I was like, you can't do it. It's just actually, it just will break the game.
I mean, you can, but it's so
it's
kiteable. It's so kiteable, you
yeah.
can only use it in a very
Oh, yeah.
small variety of encounters.
But then you have this cool thing where it has Longstrider, it has illusionary objects, so it can hide itself. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm seeing the story. It's like it hides in plain sight, and when it really needs to, it can scatter itself out of the way. It has these cool abilities to defend itself, and that's was immediately made it a cooler monster into 1 silver. I'm trying to see what else. Other things like if you use abilities that no one else does, Aquatic Ambush is a famous one. Like
Also, because Steven was famous for getting
That's right.
he was famous for getting praised for doing it in one of his
Ron
monsters.
Lundeen gave me high praise.
So therefore, he is biased towards it now.
That's right.
So that's a super secret for like if you want to try to pander to.
Or
Steven.
but if you want to use Rend, like you want to make sure that you're using.
Yeah, you definitely do not want to reinvent the wheel on an ability. That's something that like when I was applying to Paizo, they were like, fix this problematic thing, and one of the things I saw was an ability that was very similar to a universal monster rule. So I was like, I replaced it with the universal one and commented being like, well, I mean, there's no point spending words on this when we have a perfectly serviceable ability that does that. That's a universal rule.
Oh my God, we have a question. We have a question. It's from NoNad1.
Rewinding a bit, I was just curious if you could expand a bit on what makes a monster able to be built a campaign around, even at low levels.
So I would say in general, the question was, what makes a monster able to have a campaign built around it in low levels? What makes it the kind of extensible monster that's not just a one-off? I would say one thing that does is a monster that has the opportunity for advancement or specialization off of what it does. Like Steven mentioned drow, any humanoids could be like, well, there's a drow assassin and a drow mage. But you can also think about how a type of monster, even if it's not a humanoid, might be able to have variations, more powerful versions of itself, organizations. Like there was like a bush in the last contest that likes to pick locks. But it also mentioned that the more powerful versions of them sometimes like take control of thieves guilds. And that is part of something that could make it be part of a bigger adventure, and that also that won platinum because it was a really good bush that picked locks.
Well, like even the probably one of the best ones is the Husk. The Husk was so original and so strong that it appeared in a Pathfinder adventure path. I mean, that's about as good as you can get.
It's a blighted type of plant.
Yeah.
And so it was so original and so strong and so developed by Patrick, who also was developing the adventure path, that it appeared in the adventure path of the quest for Frozen Flame.
Yeah, and it's basically it's not undead. Everyone thinks it's an undead plant,
but it's blighted.
It's a blighted, corrupted plant, and suddenly you're like, wait, did no one ever invent this? And you're looking, you're like, holy crap, no one invented
You'll see
this.
some one-off monsters that are. They say they're blighted in their lore, but with the husk trait and the idea that any plant can become a husk, a leshy can become a husk, a boreal can become a husk. Hey, dryads are fae, but they have the plant trait too. A dryad can become a husk.
Yeah, husk suddenly became a keyword.
You can have like almost a zombie apocalypse type thing with husks that are corrupting all the plants in your forest. You suddenly have a campaign.
Yeah, and also, the thing is, if you have a monster that you can't build a whole thing around, like the blood mouse is a good example. Like the blood mouse is fun and everyone loves the blood mouse. except for a blood mouse and except for maybe a blood mouse swarm, um, there's not a lot much more you could probably do with the blood mouse.
You could make like a blood mouse king or monarch or
Yeah,
something that's like
yeah.
intelligent and rules over other blood mice.
Yeah, I mean,
But
if
you
you
could do
really,
something.
you
But
could, but the blood mouse is, it's a little blood mouse. It's
yeah,
nothing major, and that's fine because everyone loves the blood mouse, and it also it expanded in a different way. We made pets of the blood mouse. I think you're just familiar for the blood mouse. There's people who carry them around and like feed them. There became more like a pet class, and that's fine too. You know, would that mouse ever win grand prize? Probably not. I mean, it's probably just not complex enough. But at the same time,
it was an obvious winner, but it was also an obvious not grand prize winner, which leads to an interesting question, which is
mhm,
what are you shooting for? Because
right.
sometimes actually, if you try to shoot for a grand prize, it may make it harder to win at all.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're like, well, no, I have a great concept, but I know Steven's not gonna say that that could be in a grand prize, so I just won't do it. I'll do this other one that's kind of mediocre, but is sort of a humanoidy thing or something that I could expand out to tell a whole story about to try to win grand, and then you don't win at all because it's getting harder and harder each year. Like
Oh yeah,
this year,
really
just to
hard.
make it to the judges round was more selective than winning copper in the original one.
Yeah.
By in terms of multiplicative, like how many people applied, and then divide out how many people made it to the judges round, that was fewer of a percentage or a lower percentage than the number that won copper in the first because more people are applying. They're learning from the building the community, talking to each other, learning and improving, and so each year it's getting a little bit tougher to make it further.
Yes.
So in my case, when I was submitting my monster, one of the things I had issues doing was expanding the flavor text a lot. Do you have any advice on expanding flavor text of a monster? Like in my case for the toy form, I was very direct with it.
Oh, you did Toy Swarm? I love
Yeah.
Toy Swarm.
In my case, like I was very direct initially with the flavor text. It was like, yeah, sometimes we can make these things to scare children away that annoy them. It's like, and then adding the fluff to that to like expand it was a little bit challenging for me. Any advice for that?
I would say when you're creating flavor, the number one mistake is starting at the wrong point in your flavor text, starting with like 10,000 years ago, in the age of Thassalon, Runelord Karzug once was in the bathroom and he had an idea. Wait, I love gold and I love killing people. What if I had made gold that could kill people? He thought. And so he went out of his bathroom and he went to his workshop and he yelled at people and he told them to make a gold monster. And 9 of them he turned into gold because he did not like the monsters that they made. But the 10th one, he did like that monster. And that monster was the Gold Marauder. Like, that is a really bad way to start. Like, and it, not, it may sound like a joke, and that was a joke. I tried to make it so over the top that no one would feel called out and be like, oh no, Mark was talking about mine. But a lot of people do start with lore or start with some kind of thing that doesn't really matter. Just like we said at the very beginning of this panel, you want to start the lore with a concept. You want to start with the elevator pitch because just like if you watched our previous panel and Nonat was giving your SEO, like what you put into the little picture to make sure people click on one of 40 little windows, your monster's piece of art and the first thing in the lore line is what's going to decide if they flip to the next page or keep reading it.
So by the way, the question, which we forgot to
oh,
say,
yeah.
because no one can hear it, is advice for lore in your monster.
How do you handle
Yeah, how
lore?
do you handle
And
lore?
because it was one of our winners was talking about the lore being one of the hardest things. So if you
Yeah.
start with something that's a hook, and you say, well, it's like gold marauders drag their prey into pits of gold, leaving them as nothing more than horrified statues made of gold. And people are like, whoa, okay, I want to know more. And then you can tell them about Runlar Karzug's like sudden inspiration in the bathroom if you need to, if
All
you
right.
feel the need.
I'm going to tell you, I have a different answer for this. So, first of all, when you write your monster, you only have 550 to 650 words. That's the magic number. And it's usually dependent upon the art of like how much we get in there.
Sometimes you get less if the art is too big.
Yeah, and then I have
If it
to.
has wings,
You
oh
wouldn't
my goodness.
well, yeah. And then I go in there and I fix it. But you get monsters like Prismatic Ooze that has like 2 sentences, if that. I mean, this is how the monster's gigantic. Now,
And that's not necessarily a good thing, but the rules in Prismatic Ooze were just so cool that it won anyway.
but if you can tell a story in your stat block, which is something I try to do when I write monsters and what I look for, especially a monster like this Prismatic Ooze, it's a Prismatic Ooze, you have to roll, it does like different effects, whether it's red, orange, yellow, green, etc. The name works. Okay, Prismatic Ooze, what does it do? Well, you probably can figure it out just by the name. That right there, you like are above everyone else just by that. The different abilities and how it works. Prismatic Vulnerability. It has different ways to consume magic and then explode the magic out in different colors. This is all in the stat. So 1 or 2 sentences is fine. And in fact, what does it say here? Sounds familiar. When powerful mages experimented with magic, strange and terrible creations are the inevitable result. The Prismatic Ooze is one potential consequence of such eldritch thinking. Wow, it's almost like you wrote that, Mark.
No, that's like exactly what I said not to do.
I know, but he did it and still won.
You
So
still won because
we don't know what we're talking
the
about.
monster
up here.
stat blocks
No.
was so good.
There
Like
you go.
Steven said, it told the story, and it was
Mm-hmm.
this one, despite the fact that it had a flavor text that would be described
It's pretty
as
generic.
not as good. And
it's very
the
generic.
judges judge on like 6 different categories. So on flavor, this would have probably gotten like, it's on a 1 to 10 scale, like probably a 3 or a 2 from me. But I
Yeah.
bet it still would have gotten a winning score
It got a
from me.
copper, though. I mean, it was a
Yeah,
copper.
and I bet it would have gotten a winning score from me because it had really cool mechanics, and there are 5 other categories that I would have been like, oh, this is a really good concept, though, even though its lore was like,
Yeah. And I won't get into it, but read all the lore. There's a system of how we do the lore, which is you sort of write a little bit of like the background of it, and then describe what they are and sort of their motivations, and then you could even talk about their visual, like what it looks like
Yeah.
visually.
But
And
you
that's
start
usually
with the
pattern.
concept.
Yeah.
So you give the concept, you make sure people are hooked in before you go into the giant history and any of that.
So real quick before we answer yours, Oily Wright wrote, original cool concept versus execution, which is more important?
I think
They're
that
both important.
you need them both if you want to get the highest
Yeah.
possible score. However, that I feel that my judgments of my favorites always tend to be the people who had a really good execution, because in terms of like not just winning but also, hey, and I also want to work with this person. I want to work with someone whose execution is tight and who saves me time. But I also want them to have good concepts, because otherwise what they're doing is not going to be as interesting. But in terms of winning overall, I've looked at like how all of the judges rate, how all of the audience rate, and I think that if you don't have the concept, no matter if it's executed perfectly, you're just not going to make it.
Here's the thing is that I think the concept is slightly more important because we can fix execution.
Yes.
We do. Like you and I can fix the execution.
But if the execution is absolutely
no,
wrong,
if it's completely wrong,
And it's
we
just
will.
like-
No, then
so like,
it doesn't matter how good
make
your
an insight
we actually,
save.
well, we saw a lot of that. Actually, we saw a lot of monsters that were awesome and were horribly written, and we just couldn't save them, and they just didn't make it. So but that's the thing. Good ideas are a dime a dozen, but good idea in a stat block, executing and telling the story in the stat block is hard, and then doing it to the point that I'll tell you a secret, and this is probably the best secret of all for winning. The the platinum and grand prize monsters require almost no changes from us. Very few. None of the others. They all require some semi-extensive updates, including the additional monsters they gave us. Like, so when we did the Shell Spitter and then we did the others, when we got it, it almost went in as written. It was that good, and that's a grand prize winner.
To your secret, I will give you another secret.
Okay.
Now that you have a designer who is looking at them, I'm going to be making significant, but not huge changes to all of them, all the way up to the grand prize, just for little secret sauce kind of things.
Oh well, yeah.
But it's still gonna save me so much time. Whereas I'm sure with the coppers, I'll be spending a significantly longer amount of time on them.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we said, the concept is gonna get you in the door. And yes, if your execution is bad enough, it can get you thrown out of the door. But generally, that's kind of how it goes. If it's really good, then it can get you elevated once you're in the door to like you're one of the best ones we have. You're gold or above.
Yeah. And we have another super chat, but it just says from Jacqueline Spade, $10. Thank you for the amazing feedback you gave on your judging round. That was amazingly helpful. No question, just praise and thanks. Enjoy the money. There you go.
You're welcome.
Well, we did. You gave a ton of feedback.
I gave all the judges gave feedback on exactly half, except for our Paula, who gave feedback on all of them. So everybody should have had at least one person who gave them very high marks. But
yeah.
So there's a 50% chance I gave Jacqueline feedback.
50%, but it's all anonymous, so no one knows who's who.
Yeah.
Which is on purpose. So you don't yell at him.
Don't yell at me.
What was your question?
When it comes to filling out lore and flavor text, would you ever recommend describing the combat strategies of said monster?
So
it climbs trees, jumps out to attack, stuff like that.
So
wait. So repeat the
we
question.
have to repeat the question.
Okay.
Would we ever put into the flavor text the tactics of the monster and how it does attacks?
If it's not explained directly by the.
So that's a
sometimes.
tricky question.
Sometimes.
In a bestiary, you usually don't get too deeply into it because of the fact that if it's going to be used in a lot of venues, it's going to have some different tactics. You might give the macro of like, the no-net Oneosaurus is an ambush predator.
Second time you've just made that joke.
It's an ambush predator, and it uses a picture of itself as a lure to get people to come in, and then it attacks you from behind. But it might not be like on round one. On the first round, typically, no-net Oneosaurus uses its YouTube picture ability to bring people in, then attacks the ones with the fascinated condition, so it can apply its ability, allowing it to make those flat-footed and add extra sneak attack.
Anyhow,
you might do something like that in an adventure where you're giving detailed tactics for one encounter.
Yeah, what you do is, if the monster's really specific, so like I can't remember what they called it. I did an Ooze and Starfinder. It was like a level 1 Ooze that hid in plain sight and would morph into like a coffee cup or something, to the point that people had them in their stores and didn't even know, because they just stayed like that and they just were always in plain sight.
Oh.
And so we wrote a little paragraph of detailing of like their tactics, which is they like to hide in plain sight. They will often, when the lights go off at night, they'll go back into the ooze form and eat like insects and food and then go right back. And so, and this whole backstory of like people have them and don't even know it. So that was enough. Like that,
it's
I had
also a mimic.
Yeah, it was a Starfinder mimic, but it was an ooze like this big, so you can keep it as a pet.
An ooze could probably disguise as bread. You missed on a really, really good opportunity to create an ooze that disguised as a roll and then attack people.
Oh, there you go.
And then it would be a roll for combat.
Oh. Well, that was a nice panel, everyone. So now we're going to get 5 of those in the next Battles We Best. I mean, the new RPG Superstore. But that case I did because it was necessary. But when you write an adventure, all the adventures always have the tactics, and the tactics of what they're going to do and when they're going to retreat. And that's always different for each monster.
But you can't just put that in the bestiary because, like, not every shell behemoth retreats at 100 hit points or whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
So, question. I don't know if you had or what is it, but have you ever considered monsters that might have multiple stat blocks associated with it? For instance, a creature that when you break it apart,
Yeah,
it becomes multiple small ones.
Yeah. So the question. Yep. The question is, would you consider a monster that can break apart and become multiple monsters and have multiple stat blocks? And yeah,
It's hard to submit that to RPG
we have
Superstar.
one. That it's the I just got the artwork. It's a guardian that has a seam down its side. It has 4 legs
Yep.
and 2 arms, and it can split in half and become 2 creatures that you fight
We had
individually.
like 2 that did pretty well that were almost the exact same thing for some reason, and one of them won. But in that case, also it uses almost the same stat block with adjustments. I think for the question, it was almost like, what if it's a different creature when it splits out?
The problem
And
is you don't have
that's
enough
a little
room.
hard.
Yeah, you don't have enough room for that.
You
I mean,
probably
you
can't
can
submit
do
it to RPG Superstar. I bet you could do it in a product, but I'm not sure how you would submit it in that case. Another thing you could theoretically do, if you wanted to be really tricky, is have your splitting monster that turns into multiple of something else turn into multiple of an existing monster, potentially. And then you wouldn't need the other stat block that it could turn into.
Yeah, the problem is you only have 550 to 650 words, and it's just just not enough room. If I put it this way, some of the other monster books, like the Starfinder, you get 2 pages per monster, so you can do it because then you have 1,000 words plus. So you can do it. However, the problem is if you make the stat block too complex, then people will have a lot of trouble running it. So that's like I've seen it done, but the way you do it, because we just did something like this, is that you do it in stages, and this is for your own personal campaigns, is that you have a monster that is 3 stat blocks or 2 stat blocks, and it just changes and it goes into stat block number 2, as you said, like a pre-existing monster.
You could be like, you could have a creature, let's say that when you kill it, it arises as a zombie mammoth. Maybe it was a regular mammoth that was pre-prepped to become a zombie. Well, Book of the Dead has a zombie mammoth. So you give your pre-prepped to become a zombie mammoth an ability called This Isn't Even My Final Form that says when it's reduced to 0 hit points, it instantly dies and becomes a zombie mammoth. See Book of the Dead page, whatever. You can't actually cite a page if you're making it a third-party product, so you would just say Pathfinder Book of the Dead and hope people find it, but you know what I mean.
So we only got 5 minutes because I want to end this one a little earlier just to get ready for the next
Because the
one.
big one's after this.
The big one's after this. The big, big, big one. So if any questions, answer them. Questions, get in now. There.
Ask your questions.
There you go. So next thing I would say is when you build your monster, I go through my monsters when I would submit them and go through them very carefully. You wouldn't believe it. Like I literally would sit there. It's like, does it have a crafting? What was the number? Like, does it have deception? What's the number? Why does it have that? Like I went through every single skill and I even figured out, is it high, is it low, and why? Like I would be very careful with every single little piece of the monster, because at least I know the editors, they looked at that. They actually went through and would like, oh, that skill's wrong.
And when he says that, he means the developers.
I say, yes, when the person who Mark says it should be goes through it, which is in this case developers,
I'm sorry, it's important to people at Paizo that their job title is
That's
done.
correct. That's correct. So the developer will go through and make sure that all is correct. So it's a good thing and a bad thing I'm telling you is like, how important is it that every single little piece of information in that monster is right? And the answer is pretty important, actually. I mean, as Mark said, we'll go through it in the secret sauce about like, you don't want to have like all the stats the same. There's like, you want to have even odd numbers. You don't want to have everything to be even. There's things like that.
There's small things for playability that I'll find. Like I'll find them in any monster that I didn't do a pass on, and that it'll be a perfectly great monster, but it's like, oh, I would have changed that. Like even in Battle Do Bestiary, there's some where like, oh, I could have made this slight change. It would have gone from a monster that's still really good and could have been in like a Pathfinder Bestiary too. Like even
well, if you're running your own game, you can change it because it
can.
is your own game.
I can. Well, when I'm running my own game, Steven, I can just make the monsters up in my head immediately.
That's
like
right.
those smugglers stat blocks were not part of the 41 words.
Oh, you wouldn't tell. You couldn't tell, really. But the point is that I go through it, and one of the big mistakes is that people put in too many abilities and they put in too many cool things. And what we often will have to do is take like 3 abilities and compress it into one. That's actually something we have to do a lot. And we get it still in there. Like we still get it in the monster, but Patrick and I were doing that a lot last year. It's like, I forgot, there was several monsters that had, I don't know how they got in the word count, but they did. There would be like 8 abilities. And we're like, that's too many abilities. And
Well, we just saw how they did it in the prismatic ooze. It was
Yeah.
by having 2 lines of flavor text.
Well, yeah, but these are actually normal sized monsters. They just put in like, and they were just like, we literally like. I remember Patrick went through and he would just cut one. And it's like, nope, that's gone because it's like very situational and they'll never be used.
Right.
And then
it just
like,
makes it a little easier
Yeah.
to approach.
yeah, and then the other 2 were like, those are cool. And then you just combine them into one. So again, the easiest thing is like take a look at these monsters. Look at the bestiary monsters from Pathfinder, and
you
see-
can check who won the most recent contest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's all on rpgsuperstar.com. You can even go, if you really want to know, go on to rpgsuperstar.com, see the submissions, and then go see the final published versions, see what changed.
Yeah, and I'm looking at some of these now that are pretty big. Like the skeleton monstrosity, but that's like a level 10 creature because this thing has 3 melees arranged, 1, 2, 3, 4 special abilities and trample. Cool, that's a lot. It's also level 10 creature.
But it also manages to do that in a way that it doesn't overload the GM, because one of its 4 abilities is it blows up when you kill it.
Yeah.
So
And one of its
how many
abilities-
times you need to remember that it has that ability during
Right.
the combat? One time.
Right.
You don't need to constantly be like, should I use my blow up when I die ability this round?
And one of these is a sweeping slash, which is just in moves and attacks.
Yeah.
That's just a attack ability. One of them is trample, which is 1 line, by the way, and trample is pretty.
I would say the skeletal monstrosity still probably has 1 more ability that it can effectively use. Just maybe 1 more, but it still gives it more. That gives it a little more versatility, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, and that's something else. You definitely want your monsters to be able to do stuff because they'll last 3 to 5 rounds. So you want them to do something for 3 to 5 rounds.
Unless you guys just kill the blood mice in
Yes.
round 1.
Hey, look, Toy Swarm! Yay! Yeah, look at that. You got the artwork framed. Wow, that's nice. Yeah. Did you win this year?
I didn't. I wasn't able to finish a monster.
Oh.
So
Well, anyhow.
I think that's going to be it for
Yeah,
this
well,
panel, but
that's it for
do stick around. The next one is the big announcement.
The big. But I will say, I was going to say what the new RPG Superstar. I was going to announce it, but it'll spoil some of the next panel.
Yeah, weren't you going to announce it in the next panel?
No, not really. It's going to come out soon. It's actually what I'm trying to do is, because it takes 6 months from beginning to end of RPG Superstar, and we're definitely going to do one for 2022, and we're about at the 6-month point where it would still be in 2022. So we're probably going to start it. I'm thinking around June, July. We're still
So a little bit before the next Kickstarter.
a little bit
goes out.
before the next Kickstarter, right around the next Kickstarter. No, you're already spoiling stuff. Which is so it'll be pretty soon. I don't want to start it too late. I don't want to start it like in September, October, because then it's going to leach into all of next year. But I do want to make sure that we get everything else we're working on because it's just we have a lot going on right now. So I just want to make sure that we have
are
the time
in between
and attention.
Kickstarters. That is the equivalent of Con Crunch for a company that does convention-based
Yeah.
cycles for a Kickstarter-based.
Yeah, but
company.
I will say that we have it worked out. I have the new theme, and we have it actually kind of down to a science now. It's going to work very similar to the third way. The way that we're doing now, since it's our third one. And I will announce one cool thing that you don't even know about. Are you ready? So there's these, the medals that we have on the actual RPG Superstar, and they're like little copper, like coin and silver. I'm having them made up for real, and they're actual coins. And if you win, you're gonna get the coin.
I actually did know about that.
Oh, okay. Talk to the hand. So, yeah,
But
so
I really legitimately don't know what the theme is for the next one.
He doesn't
didn't
know.
tell me.
Yes,
But
but
I did
so-
know about the medals.
But if you won, so that's instead of the T-shirts, because everyone's like, "Yes, we're the T-shirts." For the T-shirts, so instead, I'm going to send out the medals to everyone. So you'll have a real medal, It'll have a
It's
little.
gonna look like the one that you
It looks
see.
exactly, yeah, it looks exactly like it. It's double-sided. The grand prize is 2 colors. It's got the paint on it. It's gorgeous. And there's little stands so you can like put it up. And so if you win, you'll get a physical medal that you can't get anywhere else, which I think is a little cooler than a t-shirt, quite frankly. If you want a t-shirt, you can make them. You have the files, actually, so
You
make
have
your
the
own.
technology.
You do. But with that, thank you. And if you have any questions, just come to the Roll for Combat Discord, and Mark and I will answer questions. I mean, when the contest is live, everyone's very supportive of answering questions and looking at monsters and helping out. I can't, and neither can Mark and any of the judges. But up to now, if you have questions before the contest starts, we could answer them.
That's right.
Once the contest starts, I cannot answer any questions, unless generic, like questions. So thanks, and stick around for the big one.
Yes.